Okay, so we've gotten our hands on a restricted corporate risk briefing from April 2026, and what it details is a travel crisis across Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. That is, frankly, hard to believe. So, we're going to break down exactly what happened.
Right out of the gate, the first thing this briefing hits you with is the top-line assessment, and it's a real shock. The entire region is at Red Plus, which is the highest possible alert level you can have. This isn't just a heads up, it's a full-blown declaration of a critical situation.
And this quote from the briefing really gets to the heart of it. This isn't just a bunch of small, unrelated problems piling up. The analysis is saying that the entire risk profile for the system has fundamentally changed. And it all traces back to one single event that kicked off a catastrophic chain reaction. So, first things first, let's look at the big picture. The briefing lays out this kind of two-front crisis that has put the entire travel system on the highest possible alert. So, what does Red Plus actually mean for you, the traveler? Well, it's basically a complete shutdown of anything normal. We're not talking about potential threats, they are active. Business operations are crippled, and any kind of regular travel is, for all intents and purposes, suspended. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. On the surface, you see two seemingly separate issues. You've got an active conflict causing airspace to collapse in the Middle East, and then you have a massive jet fuel emergency brewing in Europe. But the briefing is very clear. These are not two different problems. They're one single cascading event. The conflict is the direct cause of the fuel crisis. And just look at how fast this all came apart. You go from the initial strikes at the very end of February to a full regional airspace collapse in March, then a dire warning from the International Energy Agency in early April, and boom, by mid-April, the whole system is at Red Plus. The speed of this collapse is just staggering. Okay, so now let's zoom in on the root cause of all this, the epicenter in the Middle East. To really get why everything shut down, you have to know about something called a CZIB. It's an official warning bulletin from Europe's Aviation Safety Agency, and it basically tells airlines, do not fly here. It's what created this massive no-fly zone over the entire region, grounding thousands and thousands of flights. And the scale of this disruption is just huge. You've got airspace closed or restricted in 11 different countries. The Strait of Hormuz, which is a critical shipping lane, is blocked. Global hubs we all know, like Dubai and Doha, are completely crippled. And even a supposed ceasefire in Lebanon is called incredibly fragile. It's just total paralysis at a major global crossroads. So the conclusion in the briefing for this section is pretty blunt. There's no sugarcoating it. The air corridor that connects Europe and Asia, one of the busiest on the planet, is, for all practical purposes, completely shut down. All right, now let's zoom back out and trace the ripple effect, because this is where you see exactly how a conflict in the Middle East leads directly to a devastating fuel crisis thousands of miles away in Europe. And listen, this isn't corporate hyperbole. The International Energy Agency itself has gone on record calling this the largest jet fuel supply emergency in history. That just underscores how unbelievably serious this crisis is for European aviation. And you can see the domino effect laid out perfectly here. The Strait of Hormuz gets blocked. That means jet fuel tankers from the Gulf can't get out. That immediately halts imports to Europe, which forces the IEA to issue its historic warning. And then airlines have no choice but to start planning for massive flight cuts. 1, 2, 3, 4. 6 weeks. Let that number sink in. According to the briefing, that's the estimated time before Europe's jet fuel reserves could literally run out. This isn't some far-off problem. It's an immediate, ticking clock with a terrifyingly short deadline. And here's why. Just look at this. Roughly half, a full 50% of all of Europe's jet fuel comes from the Gulf states. So when you block the Strait of Hormuz and turn off that tap, you instantly create a systemic crisis for the entire continent. It's that simple and that scary. And of course, a crisis this big never happens in a vacuum. The briefing explains how this one massive event is making a bunch of other existing threats even worse, creating a real perfect storm of instability. So the document highlights a few of these secondary effects. You've got Europol issuing warnings about a higher risk of terrorism in Europe linked to the conflict. At the very same time, you've got Russian hybrid warfare targeting critical infrastructure, and key transit hubs in Africa are getting more and more unstable under the strain of it all. So, what does this all mean for actual people, for travelers? Well, the final section of the briefing really gets into that. It translates all this high-level analysis into what it means on the ground and lays out what could happen next. The advice here is really direct. Suspend all non-essential travel to the Middle East. For any flight you take in Europe, you need to add a travel buffer of 6 to 12 hours. Avoid connecting through places like Dubai or Doha entirely. And then there's the big one. Expect the entire summer 2026 travel season to be a mess.
And looking at just the next week, the briefing lays out 3 possible scenarios. There's a 50% chance the blockade just continues, which means those flight cuts start, a 30% chance of some diplomatic progress, but even then, the fuel recovery would be slow. And then there's a 20% chance of outright escalation, which would make everything much, much worse.
And this chart really visualizes that data starkly. You combine the chance of the sustained blockade with the chance of escalation, and you're looking at a 70% probability that the situation will stay critical or get even worse in the coming week. The odds are not good. And so the sobering bottom line is this. The main assumption everyone is working with is that this is not a short-term blip. This is a prolonged period of disruption that will mean fewer flights and major problems for the entire peak summer season. You know what this crisis really exposed was a global travel system that was way more fragile than any of us realized. And the briefing ends on this truly chilly note, leaving us with a critical question. It's not just about when things will get back to normal, it's about if the system as we knew it even can.